This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we got a special guest on the podcast today. His name is Joe Rigney. He is a Fellow of Theology at New St. Andrews College and an associate pastor at Christ Church, and he's the author of a couple of books. So one we didn't get to today, but that's Leadership and Emotional Sabotage. But he says the prequel to this is a book called The Sin of Empathy. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Perhaps you've heard him on some other programs. He did some stuff with Albert Mohler and some other places. But basically, we're talking about, again, provocative title, The Sin of Empathy. But he describes in detail the difference between empathy and sympathy, why we say sympathy and not compassion, even though we probably should say compassion, and at what point we are sinning when we are being empathetic, and where all these worldviews come from and kind of what they tether to. And so we do some work in terms of definitions and trying to figure out exactly, hey, why is empathy reactive and why is sympathy responsive, and what's the difference, and why is sympathy that is responsive better? But also we talked about how people will weaponize pity and how pity is being weaponized to kind of change and move things. And then we get into talking about how if you kind of have this overemphasis on empathy, it leads to cowardice and indifference and also cruelty. But then we talked about the progressive gaze, so G-A-Z-E, the progressive gaze, and kind of what that does when you have church leaders, right? And we named some, that it's almost like they had, a progressive sitting on their shoulder trying to judge them like, hey, are you being a good Christian? Or are you being, as me, a non-theist, as an atheist, as somebody that I think would be a good Christian, even though I don't read the Bible and I don't even know what any of this means? And kind of how, you have the useful idiots and the conscious nefarious actors leading to a whole bunch of bad outcomes for the church. And how basically, how did these woke ideologies get into these churches, get into these entire denominations, into these congregations, kind of what kind of issues happened that precluded that, or preceded that rather. And then also you have, people talking about church hurt and how there's legitimately people that have been hurt by the church, but then there's people that just have been told, hey, you can't do that. And then all of a sudden it's their worldview that, oh, the church has hurt them. But then we end our discussion by talking about feminism and how, the different waves of feminism, how they've kind of broken the church in a lot of different ways. And he says, hey, look, a lot of these woke ideologies, they got into the church via the women's ministries, right? So it's almost like you have a woman that's kind of ordained to a degree to be the pastor of the women, and then you have the man who's actually the shepherd of the entire church. But then the church ends up splitting because the women don't decide to agree with the men on something, and then they can't come to any type of an agreement, right? But then we just kind of talk about why are men put in the positions that they are when they're not as naturally empathetic? Because there's a real and legitimate reason to that. And then at the end, he gives some prescriptions for men like us, but also pastors, for how we can fight against the sin of empathy. So guys, really enjoyed my conversation with Joe. So without further ado, let's get into it. Joe Rigney, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kyle. Good to be here.
Now, are you as smart as all the books behind you would suggest, or is that just like, because I did talk to a guy once that he had a bunch of books behind him, but it was all vanity. He hadn't read any of them. So, but yeah. Is that indicative of a big brain of yours?
I would say it's effective at convincing people that that's the case.
Hey, well, we're going to go through today because you've actually authored a couple of books. They're shorter ones, but hey, we're at least going to get the audience comfortable here at the beginning. Yeah. But I've heard a rumor that you are a bona fide professional Christian, right? You've got your own, you've got cards, you got like a plaque on the wall, all those things. So let's start there. How'd you become a professional Christian?
Yeah, so I was raised in a Christian home in West Texas, kind of a nominal Christian home, but then my family moved over to a new church when I was probably like 7 or 8, and my parents became serious about their faith, and then that led me to get serious about mine when I was about 12. My dad and I were actually baptized together in the same ceremony when I was 12 years old. Which is kind of cool. My dad passed away about 12 years ago. So it gets more significant as time goes on, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I became made a profession of faith when I was about 12, and then all through high school, was active in my church and things like that. And then in college, felt called to the ministry, and so decided that I wanted to go preach the word. And then in seminary, realized I'm actually pretty good in the classroom. And so I'm a professor by day and a pastor by night is kind of the way that works.
Okay, well, I don't want to take too much time away because I do want to get into the sin of empathy. But I am kind of curious because I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, both boys. And so at our church here in Edmond, Oklahoma, it's Faith Bible Church, so Mark Hitchcock, Dallas Theological Seminary. The way they handle when young kids get baptized, right? Yeah. So if you're 6 years old and you're at Awana or kids camp or something like that, and you make a profession of faith, they like to wait until you're 8 years old, right? Like, so that's just kind of like what they do. They have a lot of conversations with the kid, make sure they understand what they're saying, make sure they're not just saying something because the kid next to them said it. And, I guess you could call it an evaluation of fruit. And then some people, like if you're from, the Church of Christ tradition or some of these other traditions, they're like, oh my gosh, if that kid doesn't get baptized right now, like, and they die, like they're not going to go to heaven because they didn't get to the water in time. And I know there's a lot of traditions that are like that. But from where you come from, again, a profession of faith at 12, I profess faith at 15, but the difference from 12 and 15 is chasmic. And so, like, how should parents, because I know that a lot of guys in this audience that are like kind of stressed out about that, like, I want to get my kids saved before rapture, all the things, right? So what would you say to them about, evaluating the fruit of a child that doesn't have this long track record of, being a cocaine addict or being, a horrible derelict of some kind, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, since I went into ministry, I've actually pivoted, and I'm actually in kind of the infant Baptist camp now. So we baptize the kids when they're babies, but I think that this applies to both. I think parents should raise their kids in the Lord. So you should. God made promises to you, from Abraham on. The promises for you and for your children. That's true in the old. I think that's true in the new. And so parents should parent out of the promises of God. God, you said that you're going to be good to me. You're going to be good to my kids. You've placed them in my home for that reason, so that they could be raised in the discipline and nurture of the Lord. So they're in the Lord in that sense. You could think of them kind of as like external Christians, right? So we're teaching them how to pray. We're teaching them the Bible. We're doing all those sort of things, taking them to church, so that they grow up and they own it for themselves. And I just would say to parents, don't freak out about, can I pinpoint the precise moment? I remember as a kid going to youth camps where that was a big deal, and preachers would put a big emphasis on, if you can't take me to the place and the time where you made this decision, then do you really know? And I just think that's a bad way to approach it. The question is, are you now trusting in Jesus? And so if you got a 4-year-old who's like, well, yeah, you told me to. Dad, I trust you. You said that Jesus rose from the dead and died for my sins, and I believe you. Then you should just say, praise God, and continue to raise. And if you're in a church where they say, hey, we're going to wait a little bit, talk your kids through that and say, it's not because we don't think you're a Christian. It's not because we don't think that. Affirm their faith, right? We want to teach them to believe, not teach them to doubt, which I think some churches can fall into that trap of teaching kids to doubt because they haven't jumped through enough hoops to prove it. And I think, Jesus said childlike faith. That's what he's after, childlike faith. And so we don't want to look at the kids and say, your faith's not good enough.
Yeah, it's funny whenever he said like where they have a doubt issue, it's like, no. Churches that are doing this effectively need to tell you doubt is okay and train kids how to deal with doubt, not to manifest doubt, because that's part of the problem is it's like they're putting it on them. Kind of like when parents, this kind of the soft parenting thing. And so these parents will ask their kids like, hey, did anybody hurt your feelings today? Or did anything make you mad or any of that kind of stuff? It's like, that's not inherently bad as a question. But if you ask that of your kid every single day, well, they're going to be tired of answering, well, no. And then they're just going to start navel gazing and looking internally. But anyway, I don't want to get too far off of the main subject for today, because I do want to talk about this book. This is a book they released at the end of last year, The Sin of Empathy, Compassion and Its Counterfeits. So this was, I think, December of 2024. And this is like, I think you said it was like the precursor to Leadership and Sabotage, or, you should read Sin of Empathy first, which like, how should people read it?
Yeah. So basically it's a prequel in the sense that all the work was done before I wrote Sabotage, but Sabotage came out first. And you could think of it as like, there's a little section in Leadership and Emotional Sabotage where I say dangers of empathy, but I felt like that needed its own book. And so it's kind of like, the Star Wars movies. You watch 4, 5, 6, and then if you want to go watch 1, 2, 3, you can go do it. But it's that kind of deal. So it's a little bit deeper dive on the problem that afflicts us in our culture, whereas Leadership and Emotional Sabotage is more solution oriented.
Well, let's go ahead, and we're going to spend most of our time today focusing on the sin of empathy, because I remember reading in Leadership and Emotional Sabotage, there was a very, very short section about the sin of empathy, and so this is kind of like the double-click version of it. So Let's just start at 30,000 feet, because then we're going to get into all the details. But why this book? Why'd you release it when you did? Why you?
Yeah, so I've been working on this subject for now probably 12 years or so. About 12, 15 years ago, I read a book by a guy named Edwin Friedman, this Jewish rabbi, called A Failure of Nerve, Leadership in the Age of the Quick Fix. It's not a Christian book. Obviously, he's a Jewish guy. He died like in the 2000s. And I just remember feeling like, man, this is really insightful just on the way people work, on the way organizations work, lots of really good stuff. And one of the things he talked about was the fallacy of empathy, that leaders are often told the main thing you need to do is be empathetic. And he says that actually gets things backward. You actually need to be a certain kind of leader first, and then you can afford to be compassionate and kind. But if you're not decisive and clear in your leadership, empathy will become a tool of manipulation that will hijack your institution, because you'll be always chasing around. You'll basically adapt. His argument was empathy in the modern world. Basically, we adapt to the weakest, most immature, most reactive, most unstable members of our community under the guise of like, I'm trying to be kind and compassionate, empathetic. And he said, what leaders really need is, what's my institution for? I'm going to be clear about that and go for it. And then out of that, I'm free to be able to call people, minister to people, help people, things like that. So I read that back, 15 years ago. Thought it was insightful, and then it just felt like the world conspired to prove his point. And so over the last 10 years or so, we've seen from basically the woke stuff. And I saw it in the church, I saw it in the culture. And so I said, I really want to dig into this a little more, frame it in more of a Christian frame. And so back in like 2015 or so, I started teaching classes on it at the college I was teaching at, leadership classes, and then started writing and speaking on it. And I remember, Doug Wilson and I did a little video on it called The Sin of Empathy back in like 2019. And when that came out, I thought the title would be a little bit provocative. I thought people would go, oh, but like there's a bunch of people who just lit their hair on fire. And it was like, oh, I think I'm onto something. And I just kept writing about it. And every now and then it would just blow up. And I would just kind of say, I'm going to double click on it again. And I'm going to come at it from a different angle. And I'm going to try to clarify for people what I mean, what I don't mean. And I just think and then all of a sudden it's like more and more people are like realizing like, oh yeah, that it gives language to people to try to figure out like what happened to us as a society over the last 10 or 15 years. Like how did we get here? And I think running under the currents of a lot of our a lot of the divisions in the church is this phenomenon of untethered empathy.
Well, look, we're going to do some definitional work because one of the things that has been such a blessing for the ministry that we do is we give men language around things that they've already felt. Like, I remember when I did an entire episode on how modern, like contemporary worship music is basically for women and effeminate men. And there were these men that have been sitting in these congregations for years thinking, I'm broken, I'm the problem, I'm not saved because I don't like these, Hillsong songs or these Bethel songs or whatever. And it's like, hey man, that's not necessarily a you problem. And, it could be a you problem, but you kind of give them language and scaffolding around it. But it's hard to get at scaffolding when we don't know exactly what we're talking about. So we need to do some definitional work. We need to define empathy. We need to define sympathy, right? You do that in the book. But then also there's a delineating line that you make in the book between, with passion and sympathy. Right? Yeah. Because you actually like the word compassion over sympathy, but then people don't always get the same idea. Yeah. And I guess, let me throw another one in there, untethered empathy. So we're looking at empathy, sympathy, compassion, and what is untethered empathy? Yeah,
good. So I think I try to use the word empathy in one of two ways. One is like a real basic kind of neutral way that just means like emotion sharing. So you're happy, I'm happy, you're sad, I'm sad. And it's not really a moral thing at that point because it's just like a human thing. People do it. God built us to kind of share emotions in that regard. And so that's kind of the neutral sense. I'm fine with that. I don't use that a ton because I'm focused on a different phenomenon. It's how that thing jumps the rails. And so think of it this way. I use this illustration, I think it helps people get the idea. If someone is drowning in quicksand, which if you grew up in the 90s like I did, you thought that was going to be a big problem. All the movies had somebody drowning in quicksand, and you're like, I don't know, this is everywhere. It's everywhere. But if someone's drowning in quicksand, there's kind of three attitudes you could have to them. The first we would call apathy, where you just turn your back and you walk the other way. You don't even care. You're not going to help them. That's apathy. Everybody knows that's bad. The good impulse, the right impulse, what I would come in and I would call this sympathy or compassion. And I just use those interchangeably. Like sympathy and compassion, I just use as synonyms. Sympathy and compassion would say, I want to help this person. They're hurt. They're in the pit. They're drowning. So I'm going to reach in there and I'm going to grab them. So I'm getting in there with them, but I'm also going to remain tethered to the shore. I'm going to grab a big branch so that I can brace, so that I'm tethered to the shore. I'm tethered to them. And that's going to give me leverage so that I can get them out of the pit. That's, I think, the biblical response. That's a virtuous response. What the modern notion of empathy demands is not that. Instead, it says you have to jump in with both feet. You have to jump in, and now you got two people who are drowning in this quicksand. And what's the shore? What do I mean by the shore? Well, that's what's true. That's what's good. That's what's wise. For Christians, that's Christ. That's God. Like, you're tethered to something beyond their feelings and their suffering, so that you're actually in a position to help them. Whereas I think in the modern world, the hijacking or the corruption of this good virtue called compassion or sympathy is this demand that you just go wherever their feelings want to take you. Whatever their feelings say, that's true. And that's their truth. And you are not in a position to correct it, challenge it, rebuke it. You must validate it, affirm it, and celebrate it. Whatever they feel, you have to agree with. And so there's a kind of relativistic element to that empathy. And so that's why I call it untethered empathy, because we've become untethered, unhitched, detached from what's true, from what's good, from God.
When I feel like untethered empathy should apply if you're 3 months old, right? Because it doesn't matter what's going on with a 3-month-old or an 18-month-old or something like that. Yes, whatever your concern is, cold, hot, uncomfortable, bloated, hungry, we have to validate that. But after about the age of 2 or 3, it's like, okay, we're not just going to go full bore on whatever it is you think, but you do say in the book that you say empathy is reactive, whereas sympathy is responsive.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, that's way too hard to delineate between the two. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So reactive is that. So think about the Bible word for this is like passions. So this Bible word passions. What do we mean by that? And it's basically those knee-jerk, snap judgments, snap reactions that we have to reality. You see something good, you want it. You see something bad, you recoil from it. You see something that you want, and then somebody gets in the way, and it's like snap anger, right? That's a passion. And those things are good. God made them, but they're meant to be governed. They're meant to be on a leash. And so God designed us. So it's like God is over our mind and our mind is over our passions. That's how it's supposed to work. But because we're sinful, we get turned upside down. We ditch God. We unhitch from him. And now we put passions in the driver's seat, and they decide where we go. And so when I say empathy is reactive, that's what I mean, is that basically we drown in those emotions. They overwhelm us. You think about the way, and we talk this way about other passions. Like, I was blinded by anger, and that's why I did that thing. Or I was overwhelmed by grief. Or I was paralyzed by fear. That way of talking, that the passions are they get us by the throat, and we just do things that we know aren't good or wise, but we do them anyway. And my argument is empathy, when it's unhitched, acts like that. Yeah, we see somebody hurting, and that becomes whatever we have to do to make their immediate suffering go away, we'll do it, even if this is the key thing, even if in the long run that's harmful to them or to us or to other people. We will do things, we will go along with things just to make, in the short run, make the pain go away or alleviate it, because we'll do things that are harmful in the long run to alleviate short-term pain. So it's their immediate what are you focused on? Their immediate feelings or their long-term good? And I think compassion says we need to focus on their long-term good, and from that, deal with the feelings. Empathy says, no, short-term feelings, all that matters. Let's relieve that pain in any way we can. And you end up doing more harm than good, because out of a misguided sense of compassion.
Well, Joe, I think up to this point, most people with a functioning brain and logic and reasoning intact would agree with most of everything that you just said. But obviously, you've already alluded to the fact that the title of the book is going to be provocative to some people. It's kind of hard to provoke me at this point. But yeah, the sin of empathy, right? The sin where there's some sting to that, probably for some particular reason. And so I guess, the way I've explained it, because I've had people ask me about alcohol, for instance. They're like, hey, is alcohol a sin? And my response to them is, it depends.
Right.
And they're like, wait, what do you mean? I'm like, drunkenness is always a sin, right? But I do think for some people, for me, I've never had a problem with drinking, right? So I can have a whiskey or two and it doesn't turn into 17. It's just never been a problem for me. Yep. However, I do have friends that one whiskey does turn into 17. And so if they have a sip at a bar, that may be sin for them, but me having a sip, again, it's kind of hard to be, black and white about it. But for me having a sip at a bar, it's not sinful at all. Again, we see Jesus' first miracles, turning water into wine. We see from the scriptures that Jesus, yes, himself did partake in alcoholic beverages. Don't tell your Baptist friends. But at the same time, why is sin empathy? Or I guess, perhaps a better way of saying it is, what kind of empathy, or at what point is empathy being shown in a particular situation considered sinful?
Yeah, I think so. Again, do the same thing that you do with other passions. So everybody would say, if you said the same thing about anger, is anger a sin? And people are going to go, well, it depends. What are you angry about? And is your anger under control? So the ungoverned anger, we have a category for ungoverned anger, unrighteous anger, losing your cool. That's a sin. And then you have a category for righteous anger. Jesus throws those tables over. He's angry at death, things like that. And so we distinguish. There's good anger, bad anger. There's good grief. Bible says there's ungodly grief or worldly grief that leads to death. There's holy fear. There's unholy fear. So all of these other passions we know can have good and bad versions. What people have a hard time with is they think, well, empathy is too good to ever have a bad version. And I go, okay, if you think that empathy, pity, compassion, whatever word you want to use, this disposition to like help people who are hurting, if you think that is so perfect it could never go wrong, I'm just going to tell you, if I'm the devil, that's exactly where I'm going to hide stuff. Because people will never look for it there. They don't have a category for, there's a bad kind of empathy. But the Bible tells us actually a number of places that in the Old Testament law, it says like, if your brother or your sister or your son or your daughter or your friend who you love, if they try to entice you to idolatry, it says your eye shall not pity them. Don't pity them. And so there's times where the Bible's like, that's an inappropriate time for pity. That's not what pity is for. That's where you have to draw some clear lines. You have to do some hard things. You have to break relationships. In the Old Testament, it was like, you got to execute people, right? Like this is a sin against the community, against God. This is over. And so there's times where empathy, pity is inappropriate. And we can make those distinctions with these other passions, these other feelings. And I'm just saying we need to do the same with the sin of empathy. So if I'd written a book called The Sin of Anger, I think everybody would have been like, yeah, I get it. Yeah, but sin of empathy, people don't have that bucket. And I'm trying to create that bucket because what's happened to us as a church and as a society over the last 10 or 15 years is this good impulse to show compassion to hurting people got hijacked and manipulated by activists to steer us into doing things, agreeing with things, allowing things that are really destructive and evil. And they did it in the name of empathy.
Hey guys, real quick. As you've heard me describe before, I am incredibly conservative about the supplements that I take. I spent years being terrified of putting different products in my body because I didn't know what they were made with or if it was going to be kind of fly-by-night companies using all kinds of crazy ingredients. So I've always wanted to partner with an American company that only uses the highest quality ingredients, and that's why I want to remind you that we are partnered with Jocko Fuel. Jocko Fuel is Jocko Willing's supplement company that is based here in the United States. So what are some of my favorite products that they make? So they make whey protein powder, and guys, they just released a cookies and cream flavor not that long ago, and it is ridiculously good. Make sure you use it with milk. It makes it even better. They also make clean energy drinks. I finally decided what my favorite was, and that's pink lemonade. That is my favorite of all their flavors. But they also have the best tasting greens powder on the market. I prefer the peach flavor myself. They also make pre-workout and ready-to-drink protein. So I actually mix the ready-to-drink protein in my boys' milk, and they love it. They're constantly like, Dad, banana milk. So we got to hook that up in the Thompson household. But I also use their krill oil, fish oil, creatine, vitamin D, and their sleep aids. And guys, they've got new stuff coming out all the time and a bunch of stuff I didn't even have time to mention. Guys, if you take your health and wellness seriously, then you simply can't afford to put cheap and inconsistent supplements inside of your body. Try Origin out today by going to www.jockofuel.com. That's jockofuel.com. Use the promo code Undaunted to get 10% off your order. Again, that's jockofuel.com, promo code Undaunted to get 10% off your order. Well, and even in the book, I'll read a quick quote. You talk about the weaponization of pity. Yep. And here's a quote from the book. The passion of pity is what happens when love for the hurting, the broken, and the weak, what we typically call compassion, becomes a god, and in doing so, becomes a demon. Right. Yeah. And so that's where it's like you take the impulse and you think it's pointed in the right direction. And also, and don't worry, we're gonna get to this. Part of the reason why if you did a book called The Sin of Anger, it wouldn't have had caused any kerfuffle is because when you say the sin of empathy, you're sticking your thumb into something that has a capital F feminine element to it. And we live in a culture and a church that is kind of downstream from third and fourth wave feminism, but don't worry, we'll get there. I know you're chomping at the bit. But I do want to talk about another quote from the book where you kind of get into 3 traits of how, and this is where it's like, okay, we've been in the world of philosophical. Great. Now we're going to start getting into the world of like, what does this actually look like? So here's a quote from the book. Despite the appearance of love and mercy that empathy puts on, I want to argue that a community in the grip of empathy winds up being characterized by 3 traits: cowardice, indifference, and cruelty. And so again, you attach the word empathy to cowardice, indifference, and cruelty, and people are like, whoa, 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 bridge too far. So what say you?
Yeah, good. So I'll give an example from the Bible. So everybody knows the story of Aaron at the golden calf. I assume people know this, right? Israel's up on the mountain. They've just got the 10 Commandments. Don't worship other gods. Don't worship idols. Moses goes up to talk to God in this big cloud, and Aaron is left in charge. And the people come to him, and they're like, hey, we don't know what happened to that Moses guy. We're kind of scared, right? These people have been put through the ringer. They've been traumatized, right? Like they were in Egypt. They were slaves. They've been let out. They almost thought they were going to die at the Red Sea. Then God made a way. Moses has been God's like dude on the ground. He's been, made them feel safe, and he's gone now. He's up on the mountain. They don't know what happened. And so they're scared. And then their emotions are so powerful that Aaron's like, okay, I'll build you a calf. And he does. He gives in. And so people look at that and they go, he was a coward. And I go, yeah, what? And how do you think he justified that cowardice? Why do you think he went along with what the people wanted rather than doing what God wanted? Why did he do that? And the answer, how would he have explained it to himself? He's like, the people were hurting, right? Yeah. The people were, and so it's like the cowardice, we do things that are cowardice and we justify or rationalize them in the name of empathy because we find other people's emotions so uncomfortable to us that we'll do anything to make them go away. So that's cowardice. The indifference is empathy kind of acts like a spotlight, and it highlights, when it's untethered especially, it highlights the suffering of certain people and ignores other people. So I remember there's this advertisement a number of years ago in like a political race where, and it was like this young girl, teenager, basically saying, I was raped by my stepfather. And if so-and-so gets elected, I would no longer have the choice that I had whenever I was raped. And so he's going to take away my choice because I had options and I had choice and everything like that. And she said, so don't elect this guy. And I thought this is great. This is a great example because what it's doing is it's awakening your compassion for this girl, which is totally legitimate, right? She's had this great evil done to her, and you should feel compassion for her. You should feel anger for the guy that did it. You should be like, he should be in jail. Maybe he should be executed if we were a just society, right? Amen. Like we should be, that's what should happen. And so you feel compassion, but who gets left out of the picture? And it's like that unborn child got left out of the picture. Her unborn baby who did nothing wrong, but who's a real person, is there, but totally ignored, not a worthy object of empathy, and is just buried under these euphemisms. And so we can be kind of indifferent to the suffering of this child who was executed because we're so overwhelmed with compassion for this girl. And that's another way that kind of like it's selective. And then that goes even farther, right? It's cruelty to the child. But like, this is one of the things I think that surprises people. Like, so in the modern world, people are like, hey, we're very divided. It's polarized. Tribalism is everywhere. Hatred everywhere. We need more empathy. And what the researchers are actually finding is that when they go look, like, what effect does empathy have on that kind of system? It actually increases the tribalism and division. And it's not surprising why. It's like, well, because I so identify with this group of people, their pains, their suffering, the oppression that they're under, that means I can justify great cruelty toward their enemies because I have so much compassion for them. And so C.S. Lewis, one of the guys, I quote him a ton in the book. He's one of my heroes. He has this line where he says, pity, a good emotion like pity, when it's detached from justice, when it's detached from love, right? So there's that untethering. It's that it leads through anger to cruelty. It leads through anger to cruelty. And so all of a sudden you start to like rewind the tape over the last 10 years and you think about the way that the most empathetic people who were talking about the oppression of various groups, and then you realize, like, that person, if you crossed them, could absolutely unleash a mob of rage against you. If you violated whatever their empathy was, they just hate it. And you're like, why? Like, there ain't no mob like an empathetic mob. And so you're going, look at all this empathy, but what does it do? Well, it just awakens the passions, and that passion shifts very easily from compassion for that group, hatred towards you because you're on the wrong group. So I think so empathy can justify great cruelty. It's what's lurking. It's because it unleashes those passions and spreads destruction wherever it goes.
Well, I think in addition to that, empathy kind of causes people to, and I don't mean this to be offensive. I'm not a stranger to being offensive, but it's almost like people turn their brains off, the part of their brain that can just make calls and make decisions. Because if I were to tell you, hey, my dad, he went crazy. He decided to go to the liquor store and rob the place, got into a scuffle there, decided to shoot the clerk. Oh, sorry, twist in the story. He gave the money he stole from the place to me, and now I'm being charged with murder because of something that my dad did. And
Right.
I'm going to get the death penalty because my dad killed somebody else. Everyone will be like, wait, there's way too much in this story that doesn't make any sense. But in the exact situation that you described, this horrific evil was done to a girl, and all they are doing is multiplying the evil by killing the baby that is an innocent bystander in this. But again, if you take it into those terms, then we fall off into euphemisms and clumps of cells and all these different arguments that absolutely don't go anywhere if you use the full power of your brain. But I think part of the thing is because of something, and we're going to park here just a little bit on the progressive gaze. Yeah. And that's progressive GAZE, by the way, for anyone that wasn't quite paying attention.
Or the other one. I mean, it works. It works both ways.
It does actually work both ways. That's what she said. But what in the progressive gaze, in the book you argue, hey, we have to get out from underneath this gaze. And so just very quickly, because I've got several quotes in reference to the progressive gaze, what is it?
Yeah. So the idea is basically that many of us come to have, like I think the church in particular over the last 10 or 15 years came to have a little progressive sitting on their shoulder, evaluating whether or not they were being good Christians. Okay, so we kind of adopted, we basically, out of a good desire, like different churches were like, hey, we need to reach people, we need to reach the lost. And when they targeted secular urban progressives as like the prime like mission field, like we want to reach those people with the gospel. And so that meant we like studied and like looked at them and said like, well, what do they care about? What do they love? What do they hate? What are their concerns? And let's show how the gospel meets those needs. And as a result, we came to have this little progressive on our shoulder who was like evaluating whether or not we were good Christians. So that meant like, are you being compassionate enough towards the right groups? And so progressive categories, progressive ideology defined, well, this group is worthy of compassion and that group isn't. So when people said, you got to care about the poor, and it's like, well, what they meant was I have to care about minorities and urban centers. That's what the poor was. If you said, oh, you mean like the white guy, working class guy in West Virginia with the red hat, you're saying I should really care about him? It's like, no, that's not what we meant. And so it was very selective, but Christians came to adopt that as like the standard of compassion. And so we began to adapt or massage the truth and cater to that audience. So we came to live under the progressive gaze, which means there's certain things we wouldn't say. We'd mute ourselves because we wouldn't want to offend them. And there's certain things we would really emphasize an accent because we were trying to like win them over. But instead of actually winning them to the gospel, we were just pleasing man. And as a result, like this is how the church started to get hijacked by wokeness, by the social justice movement, by all of these other, like these ideologies. How did they creep in? And it's like they hijacked our desire to be compassionate under the progressive gaze and to be respectable. Like what is a good kind of Christian, the right kind of Christian? And we would distance ourselves from the Christians that weren't like that. Oh, those culture warriors, those moral majority, those fundamentalists, like we're not like them. And we'd put daylight between us and the bad Christians in order to try to gain an audience with this particular identity group.
Yeah, let's go a little deeper there. There's a quote from this section of the book. It's, Christians began to censor themselves and became reluctant to challenge woke ideologies, as you just said, to question specious proposals related to race, sex, and abuse, and to speak clearly about progressive sins. And so for any of these types of ideologies, so let's just say, the Marxism, communism, socialism, critical theory, feminism, like all these different things, this witch's brew of nonsense, you need two types of people, and I've said this a bunch. You need conscious, nefarious actors, and then you need useful idiots.
Yep.
And so conscious, nefarious actors, I think a couple examples of those in our modern parlance, I guess, as it pertains to Christendom would be Andy Stanley, Russell Moore. Yep. And then I think you have some well-meaning, useful idiots, like maybe you can say like a J.D. Greer with the stuff that went on with the SBC and some of the racial stuff that went on. And I've listened to a sermon of his recently where he was basically advocating like, hey, Christians should be the ones standing up for the rights of LGBTQ plus people. And then I'm just smacked with these recent stories of these gay men that are legally able to obtain baby boys, right?
Yeah.
So there was a gay couple in the UK that was adopting a baby boy. They were in the process. This baby was in their care, and these two men raped this 18-month-old baby to death.
Yeah.
There's the other couple where one of the guys in the couple from Pennsylvania is a registered sex offender, and his sex crime was against a child, against a boy, but they were able to go around the system, even though the surrogate had to go through all kinds of vetting in order to have this baby. And then they give this baby boy unsupervised to two men, and one of them happens to be a convicted pedophile, right?
Yeah.
So is that the type of stuff we're
100%.
advocating for? When you advocate for the rights of LGBTQ plus people, in the same breath, you're going to say, well, why can't they enjoy the magic of fatherhood and the magic of having kids? It's like, well, if you're an atheist, nature says they can't. And if you're a theist, God says they can't. So what exactly is the argument? So let's talk a little bit about, the conscious nefarious actors and the useful idiots in this space.
Yeah, that's right. So I call the useful idiot, what you call useful idiots, I call the respectables, because they became very concerned with credibility under the progressive gaze. So they wanted to be seen as the right kind of Christian by saying, we're not going to thunder against certain sins. We'll whisper about certain sins, right?
Because apparently God whispers about sins. Even though I think Sodom and Gomorrah may have been a little bit loud, but
a little bit loud,
that's
right?
Neither here nor there. Yeah.
But the idea was like, hey, we're going to put the emphasis where we say the Bible does, and we're not going to actually challenge the cultural sins that are staring us in the face. And we're going to rationalize it under we want to reach these people. And so we're not going to punch them hard with no, this is just evil and wicked. So and I think the sodomite marriage is a really good example. I mean, I think even that, here's a good example. The older term for homosexuality that was common in legal documents and in society for years was the word sodomy. Came from Sodom, right? And then over time, it was like, hey, that's a mean word. That's a mean word. We shouldn't use that word. We should use a word like if it was clinical, it'd be homosexual. If it was pop culture, it'd be gay. And we softened the language and we stopped saying no, the sodomite marriage doesn't exist. And in doing so, we catechized ourselves into thinking this isn't a big deal. We suppressed the gag reflex that we ought to have towards those sins, and we covered them over and masqueraded as this is just one more way that people do it. And now that Obergefell happened and everything, we just kind of got to make peace with it. And then what happens is we did that, and then now we're seeing all of this insane fruit of that sort of slide, whether it's the trans stuff, whether it's the horrors that you just described in surrogacy and gay adoption. We see that and we're going well, how do we stop that? It's like train already left the station because you were trying to be too nice. You were trying to be empathetic rather than being principled and saying, what does God say? So the key thing is, should you be compassionate to people who have unwanted, same-sex desires? Absolutely. But you have to be clear. You have to be clear that those desires are wicked and vile and need to be repented of and put to death every time they arise, not coddled and catered to out of some misguided sense of showing compassion. And that's what happened. And the world, you mentioned the nefarious actors. When the world realized, Christians are trying to please progressives, progressive groups started pouring money into being well, let's just hijack that baby. Let's just steer. They realized so you had these nefarious progressive activists who had billions of dollars and that they would funnel to Christian organizations with credibility to mute Christian witness or to play up, hey, focus on climate change. Hey, focus on social justice. Focus on these other things. Stop talking about sexual ethics. Because that was the progressive agenda. And it was very, very effective. I think now we live in a time where there's a little bit of a backlash. And it's this is part of what my book is trying to do, is say, this is the play that was run. We need to learn how to avoid it while still being truly compassionate.
Well, and Joe, I think the issue here as well is people are just way too quick to write off someone as a mean pants. That Megan Basham, she's dividing the brethren. That's what she's doing, because she's pointing out things that you can go look up for yourself, sermons that you can go listen to for yourself. And again, it's we're untethering from realistic logic when it comes to certain things. So specifically with the homosexuality thing, because here's two men having a conversation right now. We are not same-sex attracted. That is not our flavor of sinful bent. But let's just say this, because again, Christians have bought into the cultural lie that this is just how they were born. These are Christians that listen to Lady Gaga, apparently. They were just born this way. There's nothing we can do about it, so let's just make the tent bigger. Well, let me just say, what if my flavor of sin was I like to get angry and fight people.
Yeah.
So when I get angry, I go into a bar and I'm wearing a red shirt and that guy's wearing a blue shirt and I don't like blue. And so I drag him out by his coat and then I decide to beat him half to death in the parking lot. And then I say, wait. That's just who I am.
Born this way,
I
baby.
was born this way. I'm angry and I like to fight. Don't judge me. Are you passing judgment on me? That's mean. Again, nobody would think that that's a realistic way to operate in the world, but it's just where people go because it's where the focus of their ire is.
Although it's interesting, I think that some people would actually go with that is provided you were a part of the correct victim class. So one of the things that untethered empathy enabled was what I've affectionately called the Victimhood Olympics that we lived through, where people competed to see what victim classes, what oppressed classes do I belong to, because the greatest victim sets the agenda.
Yep.
And the greatest victim can get away. The victimhood conferred invulnerability. So I remember like right after that October 7th deal in Israel where Hamas went in and did all those horrors, there was a spokesman for Hamas on some news show. And they were asking him, like, how could you say, how could these people do this? And he was like, well, we're victims. Everything we do is justified. And I just thought that's the logic right there, right? That's the logic that we have introduced into the system is if you're a victim, everything you do is justified. Any rage, any outburst, after George Floyd, they burned cities to the ground. They did. And Democratic politicians, sprung them from jail, posted their bail. And it's like, well, why was that happen? Well, because they were victims of oppression and therefore anything they did was justified. That's what's happening in our cities under progressive politicians who are catering to criminals, right? It's what in the UK, you can go to prison for a decade because you post a social media thing that's not politically correct. But if you rape someone, you're a part of the right victimhood class, if you're an Islamic immigrant and you rape a bunch of white girls, then you'll get out in a year or two. But if you post a meme calling that out, so it's like justice is totally perverted, and it's all being done under the name of compassion. We need to have compassion for designated victim groups. It's not true compassion, because true compassion would say we're going to tether ourselves to justice. Mercy and justice go together. And if we're tethered to justice, it means we have some emotional distance. Like you were talking earlier about the way you can kind of lose yourself. You don't think clearly. It's like, yeah, you got to have some emotional distance to say what's true, what's good, what's the law, what's proper standards. And then you make the decision and now you can be compassionate. But compassion flows out of that. If it goes first, it won't work.
Well, it's a bastardization of what justice even is, because we get these ideas, because there are things that should be incredibly uncontroversial to say out loud, but they become things you can't even think. Like gay surrogacy and adoption should be completely illegal. It should be unthinkable. But if you say that out loud, it's one of the worst things you could possibly say. The fact that a boy could become a girl, that a child could become an animal, like a furry, like these are, of course, things that are ridiculous. Like, oh, we shouldn't take advantage of human beings that can't kill themselves and allow them to be murdered. Well, of course, like we can't do things like that. But again, we untether from those types of things. And it does come back to those groups. I do want to read a quote from the book just to put a finer point on what you said. Yeah. In all of this, many Christians, and especially Christian leaders, had their eyes on three groups, all of whom reinforce the progressive gaze. Victims or oppressed groups, those are the objects of empathy. Advocates, those are the arbiters of justice, and other respectable Christians, and those are the purveyors of credibility. And so it distorts the lens that we see actual justice through, because we're like, oh, okay, well, this person, because of their lived experience, because of their standpoint epistemology, we apparently need to change what knowledge is, right? It's tied into Gnosticism and all the things. We need to change what real life actually is because this person feels a particular way. And so I think that does go back, staying in a Christian context, to where people talk about abuse or trauma or church hurt. Now, when I hear the phrase or the term church hurt, I am automatically just assume this isn't real. Kind of like when someone says, we found a noose on a construction site. My brain just goes, no, you didn't. You found a rope in a slip knot that's helping people like guide metal beams. That's what you found, right? Yeah. And so until proven otherwise, I'm just going to assume you're absolutely full of crap. The problem is there are 100% people that have been abused, traumatized, taken advantage of, had money stolen, been sexually molested, all kinds of things inside the church. And that is legitimate church hurt. But when a pastor says, hey, stop doing that particular sin. It's bad for you. Like it's going against what God would say. You're like, I've been church hurt. So I guess we can talk about the expansion of terms like trauma or abuse or church hurt.
Yeah. So what happened was, out of real concern for victims, which there were real victims, there were real people who'd been wrong, like you said. And the way that we then began to try to address it, people realized, right, it's opportunistic. Right. Let's expand those definitions. And now, whereas abuse used to mean like physical or sexual violence, like it had a definition, like that's what, to be abused meant physical, sexual violence. All of a sudden that term gets expanded. You get some concept creep, other things get smuggled in there. So now it's like, it's psychological or emotional abuse or spiritual abuse, these sort of terms. And I would even say sometimes people were like sinned against. But by using the term abuse, basically it shut down any discussion, because once someone had been identified as the victim of abuse, everything they said was right. You couldn't question them. You couldn't say, well, wait a minute, did that really what happened? If you said, well, let's get his side. What did he say happened? It's like, it doesn't matter. Why are you re-victimizing them? And so these terms, trauma used to mean like a blow to the head that's outside the norm, and then psychologically, like you went to Vietnam and saw your buddies blown up because a kid gave him a Coke can with a grenade. Like that was traumatic. So you had PTSD. And then all of a sudden it was like a pastor told you one time that you were sinning against your husband. And now you say, I've been traumatized by my pastor. And so that, and so they were trading on the potency, the power of those words to get people to adapt to them. And as a result, real victims, like you said, so now if there was actually ever someone who was really church hurt, they've so diluted the language that a lot of people go, this is like the boy who cried wolf. I don't believe it anymore. And it's tragic, which is one of the reasons why people go, why are you writing a book on empathy? And I'm like, because compassion is too important to leave in the hands of people who are going to unhitch it from truth. Because when they do, we lose compassion itself. Like you will harden people's hearts to real suffering if you're constantly manipulating them. It's just like if, on a personal level, everybody's been on the receiving end of a guilt trip or a pity party by someone in their family, right? When they maximize their pain and suffering, they their minor inconveniences, or they get dramatic and they try to manipulate you. Once you finally realize that's what they're doing, you stop actually paying attention to, they don't mean it. You're just kind of like, you brush it off. And so if they really did face something hard, you go, yeah, but I don't believe you, because you've lied so many times about your suffering. You've exaggerated so much that I don't feel compassion for you anymore. And so that's where we are as a society right now. So the reason there's a chapter in my book called In Praise of Compassion is I don't want to lose compassion, even as I want people to learn to resist the manipulations of untethered empathy.
Well, I think this all kind of circles around the same drain to what I alluded to earlier, which is feminism. So I do want to go to this quote here from the book. Untethered empathy, in tandem with a desire for respectability and credibility under the progressive gaze, is the means by which various aggrieved groups have been able to steer communities into catering to greater and greater folly and injustice. And a key ingredient in making this steering effective is feminism. Indeed, we can't adequately address the dangers of empathy without considering feminism and its impact on the church. So feminism has taken many forms, obviously. So 1800s, early 1900s, that's first wave feminism, that's suffrage, right? Then we got second wave feminism. That's around the sexual revolution. Like, hey, I can do whatever I want with my body. And also I have the right to be equally as unpregnant as a man. Third wave feminism is, hey, women are actually better than men. We don't need them. They're awful. They're just kind of add-ons to a culture. Even though when we call the police, we definitely don't hope it's a fat lesbian cop that shows up. We want the big burly man, right? And then fourth wave feminism, they're trying to figure out what to do. It's like, all right, can a man become a woman? What is a woman? And then you've got like TERFs, trans, exclusionary radical feminists or whatever. They're like, wait, no. Feminism is for women, not for dudes that are, voyeuristic and want to dress up like girls because it gets them sexually aroused or those types of things. And so I guess talk to me about what the downstream consequences. Well, one, the church putting itself downstream of a feminist culture. Obviously, this is all fairly predictable, but let's just start the conversation there.
Yeah. So when I say feminism, I have in mind particularly the fundamental lie of feminism is men and women are interchangeable. And I think that shows up in a number of in different ways in the different phases, first, second, third. And there could be things at different places where I'd go, yeah, that was a good idea, but it was badly managed. Because I even think the first wave feminism totally disrupted the household as the basic unit of society. And many of our problems are downstream from that. But what I'm really targeting is this lie of interchangeability, which says men and women are interchangeable. And the reason it dovetails with empathy is this: women are the more empathetic sex by nature. God, and I mean that in like a good sense. Like, they are the first responders when people are hurting. They nurture, they care, they move towards suffering with comfort. Like, you think if mom and dad, like a kid falls down, scrapes his knee, dad's like, rub some dirt on it, get up, keep playing. Mom's like, come here, let me give you a hug, I'll kiss it. And so you have this kind of difference that mom and dad bring to the table because of the different natures of men and women. And so it's a good thing that God made women to be more nurturing, caring, kind, and empathetic relative to men. But what is a blessing when it's there, when it's like comforting the child who's crying, becomes a liability if you're talking about setting a perimeter and guarding something, right? So if you're talking about guarding the doctrine and worship of the church, if you're talking about guarding a border, if you're talking about, defending a nation, that empathy is a liability, because if someone presents themselves as a victim in that context, women, as the more empathetic sex, are going to be more prone to let it in. And so that's what you've seen. If we take the church context, there's a reason that all of the denominations that decided we're going to ordain women to the pastorate back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s very quickly began unleashing all kinds of sexual morality on their churches, right? So they're going to approve of all of the LGBT stuff. They're going to ordain same-sex, they're going to ordain gay people to the ministry. They're going to sanction sodomite marriage. They're going to fly the trans flag. Why is that? There's a causation here. It's not just a correlation. It happens to be the case. It's because women are more empathetic, and gay people began to present themselves as victims. So these lady pastors, quote unquote, decided, well, we got to show them compassion by affirming and validating them and fighting for their rights and so forth. And then this is the other piece of it. Once you have that dynamic in place, good men really struggle to deal with female wolves, she-wolves, or they just struggle to deal with feminine agitation in general. I think this is a key element of how this works. How do guys get, male empathy for unhappy women, right? I don't like it when she's mad, right? I don't like it when she's upset. That means I will mute, I will pull punches, and there's a good impulse there. Like, don't hit girls. So if you so it's like we're taught don't hit girls, and then you have women entering the proverbial boxing ring, whether it's ideological combat, political combat, cultural combat, theological combat, and they want to like debate stuff. And you're like, well, I'm not going to, if I'm talking to you and you start to say something false, you start to propound some heresy. Well, you're a dude, and I'm going to be like, hey, this is why that's wrong. And it's going to be like, we're going to go at it, horn to horn. If it's a girl, I'm going to be like, well, hold on. I got to like take that into account, which meant that even good men kind of felt like they were fighting with one hand tied behind their back, because they couldn't actually resist these errors when they showed up, and they kind of went along with it, and other men pressured them, hey, don't be mean to her. And so that dynamic worked its way into the church because we allowed women to be in positions that God does not want them in terms of leading churches and, manning the ramparts, guarding the doctrine and worship of a church, or in society, women in the military, and the way that that's just wreaked havoc on, our forces' ability to do their jobs. Because that's not where they're for. There is a place for that compassion, but you need to have the boundary set. Men put the wall up, and then women make it beautiful and glorious and comforting inside. But you can't put the comfort on the outside, otherwise you won't have a wall.
Yeah, you put it this way in the book. Here's the quote. Here we see an additional layer to the emotional dynamics. Put simply, it is then men struggle to deal with the unhappiness and displeasure of women. Put another way, female distress activates male agitation. So I wrote down in my notes before you said it, like, yes, so when people talk about women being in the special operations communities, whether that's SEALs or Marine Recon or Green Berets or something like that, aside from the fact that physically they couldn't possibly, there's not a woman that's ever existed that could possibly live up to the physical standard without it being changed to cater to them, you put one girl, female, on a SEAL team, those SEALs who are bred to be protectors, right? Sheepdogs. Right. All of a sudden, their focus is going to be on preserving the life of that woman. She will never be seen as a Navy SEAL. She will never be seen as equal to them. It is always someone that they are duty bound to protect. And the same thing, I mean, there was a fairly crass Bill Burr joke from back in the day where he talks about the reason why men allow women to do things and say things and kind of go crazy and all that is because we want to have sex with them. And so like that's kind of the natural male tendency is attractive woman. I want to have sex. I want to pass on my genes. I want to procreate. So if they start acting crazy, if they're legitimately crazy, okay, we can kind of deal with that. And we'll deal with it enough. And same thing why a lot of men don't stand up to their wives because they want the possibility that sex is going to happen today. So they don't want to have the argument. They don't want to bring up the thing that's wrong or hard. But I think this also kind of goes into something where you're talking about pastors were changing their approach whenever they talk to a woman. I don't know how I feel about this. I've gone back and forth on it, but a lot of churches have ministries, right? So they have women's ministry, and you talked about this a little bit in the book. They've got ministry to this type of group and ministry to that type of group, and they call it men's ministry, but they basically mean men's program. We do like a chili cook-off once a year and call it men's ministry, right? But like, should men be in charge of the women's ministry at their church? Should men be the ones speaking at women's conferences? Because these men are the men that built the walls, and now they're set to be the watchmen on the walls, as it says in Isaiah. Or is it like, no, it's fine. Like you can have intermingling. It could be all women. It can be a mixture of both. We don't necessarily need men guiding the women in that way.
Yeah, I would say we need to just distinguish two things. So on the one hand, if we're talking about teaching doctrine, teaching the basics of the faith, absolutely, that's the responsibility of pastors, and the pastors are the pastors of the whole church, not just the men, and they can't outsource that shepherding responsibility to women. If we're talking about like how to be a good mom, how to be a good wife, like kind of the practical, Titus 2 talks about this. Older women should teach younger women how to be into their kids and submissive to their husbands and, work with their hands and be diligent. It's like, that's a totally appropriate thing. We have some great women here who invest in the women of our church to show them how to be good wives, good mothers, good grandmothers, all this kind of stuff. So that's appropriate. But what often happens is we migrate from there to, well, she should be the one teaching doctrine to the ladies. And she basically becomes kind of like the pastor for the women. Lots of churches function this way. And that actually is harmful in the long term because it basically creates like two churches, and one of them is led by a woman who, again, as the more empathetic sect, is probably going to be more prone to allow certain errors to fester if they're presented in a certain way. If they're presented in that victimhood way, as a way of showing compassion to people, well, we won't draw the lines quite as clearly and so all of a sudden it's festering. So I know for a fact that if you look back over the last 10 or 15 years, the two places that wokeness most prominently entered into the church was either through the women's ministry or the counseling ministry. Those were the two places. That's how it got in, because you had people who were primed to not draw clear boundaries and instead lead and be overwhelmed by their compassion and their empathy. And therefore, it allowed it to fester, and it wrecked churches. It divided them because it took so long for people to figure out what the heck is even going on. Why are we teaching these things? Where did that book come from? Why are we leading Sunday school classes on books by Ibrahim X. Kendi? Like, how did that get into our church? And it's like, that's how it got into your church.
Well, I think it expands out to other areas as well. I'll read one last quote from this feminism section. Crucially, however, what is a blessing in one place is a curse in another. The same impulse that leads a woman to move towards the hurting with comfort and welcomes becomes a major liability when it comes to guarding the doctrine and worship of the church. And so obviously we've talked a little bit about that, but getting even onto the worship side of things, that's been a major complaint for men in my audience and men that listen to me and things like that is they feel like if they sing these songs at church, which you're made to feel bad if you don't like contemporary Christian music, that is a type of music. That is not the music that is on God's playlist. Can we just all agree on that? That God doesn't have a particular kind of music that is worship only, but Christian metal isn't worship and Christian rap isn't worship. Like we kind of need to dispense with that. But a lot of men, so the virile, testosterone-filled, manly men, as it were, they're in the congregations, and a lot of the people that are leading the worship, they either are legitimately female or they may as well be. Because, and I don't care about the tight jeans and all that stuff. Some of that's just style. I really don't care. But when they see these effeminate or feminine people singing songs about Lamb of God only, never Lion of Judah, and very emotive language and very much so like, oh, Jesus is my boyfriend. I just want to like embrace him to my bosom. And it's not the Psalms. It's not even hymns. Like, it's not something that gets a man going. And that's not the point of worship, to get you going. You were there to worship God.
Right.
But again, we're made to feel bad if we don't raise our hands and fall out in the aisle, when it's like, well, look at what you're trying to get me to read. Like, is that even God? There's a new song that came out. I don't know if it was Bethel or Ferdix Church or whoever, where they're like, we need another Pentecost.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, what?
Yeah,
What?
right.
Like, another Pentecost, I get it sounds good and poetic. What you're trying to say is we need a movement of the Holy Spirit, but good gracious. And so it's almost like, is this why you think God said only men can be pastors and heads of household? Is that kind of the whole reason?
I think that's a big part of it. And I think, so in our church community, we sing psalms and hymns, and we sing them like, we emphasize singing in parts, so that actually the music, like, there's bass lines and there's tenor lines. And so, like, what voice did God give you? Like, how deep is it? And there's notes for you to sing, so that you kind of lay down like a foundation. And then the ladies can go do all of the, like, up and down, and like hit the high notes and all that kind of stuff. And it actually works together, because it allows the men to sing like men and the women to sing like women, as opposed to where most modern worship service says everybody's going to sing the same thing, and it's always going to be at the higher end of the spectrum. It's going to be what the ladies sing. And the feel of the music. Like, we sing a lot of martial songs that you feel like we go fight right now. We could go like the Son of God goes forth to war, right? Shout on, pray on, we're, gaining ground, glory, hallelujah. Like, we sing songs like that because we think it's important for men to sing. We think the Psalms are a battering ram that we lay to the gates of hell every Sunday. We just like, boom, another battering ram. That's how we talk about worship in our context, because we want men to lead the way in singing. We want men to sing in their homes. That's another thing. Like, I can sing songs in my house that we sing in church. It's hard if you're just a dad and you're like, all right, I want my family to sing, we're going to read the Bible and sing a song. If you try to sing some of those songs that you're singing in church, the ones you're describing, it's like, dad's going to lead that? It's like, probably not. So you're just never going to do it. But if you have a song that, like, hey, every member of the family has a part, everybody, and it's a beautiful picture actually of like the church, right? Different members of the body with different strengths, different abilities, all coming together in a common purpose. Like, that's what music should do at its best, is illustrate that. And instead we've just kind of like melted it all down and feminized it. And it's no reason that men they feel like, I want to be holy. So I'm sure the guys in your audience, like, I want to be godly. Yeah. But what's being presented as godliness feels like, in order to be godly, I have to be effeminate. And so there's a tension between their natural impulse to be a man and their spiritual impulse to be godly. And I'm saying we ought to cultivate worship services where men are able, their manhood is meant to come out as godly and faithful manhood, as pious manhood, holy manhood, and not simply reduced to this kind of effeminate version.
When I think we should be slow to castigate these men, because so I've heard pastors and I've heard worship leaders talk about the man sitting there with his arms crossed or his hands in his pockets. But one of the greatest emails I've got in the history of me doing ministry was from a worship leader after I released the episode called Contemporary Christian Music is for Women and Effeminate Men. And he goes, it wasn't until your episode that I had ever even considered the men in the congregation. I was picking the songs, and again, most of the voices he's hearing in the congregation are the female voices. He's like, I never thought about what key it was in. I never thought about if a man could hit that key. I never thought about why the men were not being participatory. I just thought it was because they probably weren't Christians or not good ones. And I'm like, that might be the case. They may be there with their hands in their pockets because they're prideful and because they don't want to be seen as weak, and they think raising their hands is weird and that's sinful somehow. But maybe, worship pastor, maybe lead pastor, maybe that's not it. Maybe there's something else. And again, I know it's like, hey, if this isn't your style of worship, like, hey, that's no excuse. You need to worship God. But at the same time, it's like, if you keep giving them, you're bludgeoning them with the same feminist bat. Don't be shocked when they act the exact same way every Sunday. But Joe, we're running out of time here, so this is going to have to be the last question of the day. But it's prescription time, I guess. We've done a lot of description of some things that have gone on. Now we need to prescribe. Okay, so what are pastors? What are men inside of the church? Men inside of their own homes? What are they to do to fight against the sin of empathy, the progressive gaze, the impact of feminism, and everything else that we brought up?
Yeah, good. So my book, Leadership and Emotional Sabotage, is the lengthy end. It's not lengthy. It's actually, you can read it like in an afternoon. But the basic idea is we need sober-minded, steady leaders who have gravity and gladness, and are able to stabilize communities that are just shot through with passions. So my definition of sober-mindedness, real briefly, is it's a clarity of mind, a stability of soul, and a readiness to act. This key virtue in the Bible. It shows up in all the lists of like, what does a pastor have to be? And it's just Christian maturity, right? So clarity of mind, you're not clouded by the passions, right? They're not, fogging you up to where you can't see clearly. Stability of soul, you're not tossed by your emotions or the emotions of others. When emotions rage, you have some ballast in your boat because you fear the Lord. And so instead of having the progressive gaze, little progressive on your shoulder, you've got Jesus on your shoulder. What does he think about this? What's his evaluation? I want to please him, not please people. So there's a ballast there. And then there's a lean in. It's not a passive check out, abdicate, just retreat. Instead, it's I'm ready to take responsibility for myself and for what God has entrusted to me. That's the kind of men that we need, sober-minded leaders who have gravity and joy. And then from that, if you're sober-minded, then when suffering shows up, somebody's hurting, you can actually lean in like Christ did. You can weep with those who weep. You can rejoice with those who rejoice. You can be moved with compassion to relieve their suffering. And you can do so wisely and faithfully because you're not being steered by emotions. Your emotions are following your sober-minded conviction. And so that's the kind of leader that we need in our homes. That's what we need in churches. That's what we need in our nation. And that's why I've written these books.
All right. Very good. And amen. But we've weaved in and out a lot of stuff, but that's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, if people like it, if you can get both books on audiobook, go to canonplus.com. It's a subscription service. There's stuff for the kids. So you got shows for the kids, documentaries, lots of sermons, lots of books. Joe 99. Joe 99 is a coupon code. 99 cents for the first month. You can listen to all the books you want. See if you like it. If you like it, keep listening. If not, go do something else with your money. But that'd be the best way to get it. It's canonplus.com, Joe 99 as the code.
Guys, the books and the link to Canon Plus is going to be in the show notes. Joe, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it.
There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed my time with Joe. But before we let you go, we got a couple of things that we're going to put in the quick resilience boost at Undaunted.Life. Our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So I've got links to where you can get your copies of The Sin of Empathy and Leadership and Emotional Sabotage, and also where you can check out Canon Plus. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.